This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Well, let's cover your. I mean, I'm sure we'll probably meander organically into other alcoves or trails or paths or whatever metaphors we want to use. But let's start with your book, Krivda, your first book, which I'm still not through. I'm still working on it delightfully, but it's so dense and full of nutrition and information that it's just not something that you can just pick up and read. Like usually I do my reading while I'm eating breakfast, but I found out with that book, I either have to eat or read the book, because spreading it in between those two things, it just doesn't really work that way.
No, and there are bits where it's going to make you throw up your breakfast. So.
I haven't gotten to those bits yet, but that's funny. So let's start with that. What inspired you to write this delightfully dense book?
Yeah. I was not really inspired. I was kind of compelled. At the beginning of the Great Covidiana. I noticed that there was lots of religious vocabulary creeping into, commentators on the alternative side, commentators' observations about, some great priest of medicine and some, god of vaccines and things like that. And it suddenly clicked that there was a continuity all the way from the ancient gods, and more particularly the god of Christianity, all the way through to the gods that were coming around now. And then so many things that I had made observations of that were all sort of, pieces of a puzzle that I didn't know existed. Suddenly it all clicked. I think when the COVID thing started hitting, a number of us had things clicking, and everything started to fall into place. And so this is what happened for me. And I just then at that point, I just felt there is a structural continuity here between what we call religion and what we reluctantly call religion now. And most people, especially Westerners, don't understand that it's the same phenomenon. So I took our, best known case study, which is Christianity, which has also been the most, globalized and reified and instrumentalized and etc. for the purposes of mind control and world domination. And also because it is very obviously a secular system together with a religious system, so-called. And so, I just went through the history of it from Yahweh through to, Jesus and the Middle Ages and then as it started waning in the Renaissance. But basically, as I went through it, you had different pieces of an actual structure that fell into place. All the ingredients of a particular system of governance, domination, what have you. And once I got these bits of structure into place, well then, okay, what came next? Basically capitalism, with colonialism and with monetarization of life.
Mhm.
And that was the god of money. And you find exactly all the same structures with doctrines, with high priests, with, places of power, and with a specific way of enclosing people into that system, such that they are completely dependent on it, meaning a savior program also.
Yeah.
You've got the savior program that in religious religion establishes this mediation between humans and the beyond, as if humans did not naturally have their relationship with the beyond, which inhabits them. Okay,
Exactly.
so it's the introduction of this intermediate layer that is going to appropriate the intrinsic power of our natural relationship to the beyond, and is going to harness the rest of who we are in terms of energies and labor and love and emotions and fear and everything else. They're going to harness it, of course, for their own earthly purposes of wealth and domination, but also in service to the gods, whatever and whomever these gods may be. You can argue that way back, and it has been, quite clearly demonstrated that Yahweh was actually some kind of, being, along with a bunch of other beings of his ilk, the Elohim, and that they, came with all sorts of ET devices, and that they acted as colonizers in rather nasty, brutal ways. They were not the first, they were probably the inheritors of the so-called bad Anunnaki. But then after that, on the basis of that experience, the high priests devise the New Testament religion, where Yahweh is no longer there, he's kind of vanished. And then we go into a purely sort of fabricated story. Now, with the other religions that come after that, the god of money and the god of science, you've got the god of war who's been there throughout, and now all the way into what I call the techno god, techno mind god, because it's a particular intelligence that brings together all the different religions that have come up until then. And we're seeing now the convergence of all the different types of tech, with, of course, the god of money, with, of course, the god of war. I mean, they're all coming together, and the structure is always the same. So once it clicked for me, well, a friend said, you should write a book. And, having been trained academically and written 3 academic books way back when, I'd sworn to myself I'd never write again. But the next day I was I was in my little keyboard, and off I went again, because it was just too compelling. And, as I went, well, exactly the piece of research that I needed fell into my lap. And there were all these continuities, both exoteric and esoteric, including the whole business of, well, human sacrifice in general, but child sacrifice in particular, which has become so in our faces now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of, that's how it came. But the other element of this, I would not have been able to spot the gods had I not had a sui generis sort of immersion in an esoteric grassroots movement of Bengal in India. Why that happened to me way back when, I didn't know. It just had to happen. But those people in India, of all places, very clearly profess we have no gods, no priests, and no religions. We don't need that. We have the human path. And so, well, it took a bunch of years for what they were saying and what they were doing, and the ancient knowledge that they, the ancient wisdom inside them to kind of percolate for me. And there again, this all clicked when this God sequence became obvious to me. Everything fell into place, and the business of these dirt poor grassroots people, beyond the pale of even the caste system, these people with the dignity and the authenticity of their path, where they were saying, well, yeah, the job of a human being is to discover the fullness of what he or she is as a human being. Wow. Okay. And so, that seeded into me the path that would develop for me as a human being, not being a Bengali. And, after 10 years involvement with them, I couldn't stay any longer for objective reasons. And so that fed into the understanding of the esoteric aspect, in particular, of the gods and the religions. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, I think that's what, at least in the cases of the newer versions of religion that we're seeing with the tech religion and the sort of the medical industrial complex religion, that makes it a much more sort of ingenious tool of control when the people that are taking part in the religion itself they not only do not realize that they're operating within a religious dynamic, but that most of them, and I'm going to paint with a wide brush here, are probably leaning towards some sort of atheism or some degree of atheism, that think that they're above anything remotely resembling a religion. So then they're operating blindly in this control system that they have no clue on many, many levels.
Well, I mean, the religious system is so, it has, of course, had its usefulness historically in terms of somehow harnessing a kind of morality in the people, so that, you wouldn't have everybody going out destroying everybody else. No, Pushkat, no, you can say hello, and then you can come down here. Okay. Now, you be a good girl now. Come on. Oh, you want to be part of the fun. Okay. No, not on the keyboard.
Yeah, exactly.
There's 10 of these, so, they might come, each one in turn. But basically, the cunning thing of it is that wrapped inside the good stuff, there is the esoteric control mechanism, control package or software that is installed in our minds together with the morality. So, you get the message of love and all that, but you get all sorts of contradictions in the message from the doctrines. And you get the savior program, so that you are told that you are the best of the best because you've been baptized and because you're doing good and because you love Jesus and all this kind of thing. And at the same time, while you have to do all these good things, you're still a sinner by definition, because you're human through the Adam and Eve lineage in particular. I mean, in the story. And no matter how much good you do in the world, you're played in advance. You have to be saved. Mm-hmm. Which is why you have to go and partake every Sunday or more than that in a symbolic human sacrifice of the man Jesus. And with all the weird, I mean, they did a really crafty job of lumping together the kind of young god sacrifice that used to have to take place to ensure the fertility of the soil. and other forms of human sacrifice that were practiced, across the ancient world in the previous era before the Common Era, and package this with what I consider to be the story of an absolutely human man, and to sanitize him to their purposes, to neutralize the actual human power of his story, made him a god.
Mm-hmm.
And not really a full god, the son of God. I mean, they made it all so extremely complicated and convoluted that, people get lost. And this has given rise to tons and tons of books of exegesis, over the centuries. And to this date, I mean, people are still writing about the mystery of Jesus and this, that, and the other. It's mind-boggling when, in fact, the thing is so very, very simple. It's for us humans to discover the wholeness of what it is to be a human, from the out there into the down here, and what this means for what we're supposed to be doing here.
Yeah.
And, not in expectation and hope for an extraordinary, afterlife. Okay, here comes Mr. Hima, number 2. So, you really want to be part of the conversation today? Okay.
Come, pull up a chair.
I wish we did have chairs. Anyway, yeah. So that's it in a nutshell, basically.
And then to take that human and put that in a dynamic where it is a very disempowering place that we start off at. We were born in sin. We're sinners just by existing. And then we are supposed to be racked with guilt because of this person, but we're supposed to think that they're the Son of God, which you make a point in your book as there's a play on words with sun god there, which there's a lot of overlap between those two dynamics as far as the religious aspect of that plays out. So there's a lot of sort of self-sabotage and looking at the ourselves and our place in the world and our bodies and all worldly items there's things that are dirty or that they're tainted or that they're pithy and vulgar somehow, and the real stuff comes after we die, after we've paid for all of our sins, and we spend our lives going through these rituals of guilt and like you said, especially in Catholicism, when you drink the blood of Christ and you eat the body of Christ. I mean, that's, when you think about it just a little bit, that's very twisted. It's a very twisted sort of ritual going on. I mean, there's lots of twisted things about Catholicism. Go ahead.
Yeah. Plus, within a context that was already extremely patriarchal, making, women, nature, completely on the side of flesh and the main bearers of sin. And so enshrining in ideological, religious, salvational terms, a supremacy of male over female, such that the male was going to be messed up anyway, as per your description, by the doctrine and the rituals and all that. But he would have dominion over her and over nature.
Yes.
And you'll find later on in the book, I mean, there are, nature, apart from the mystics, of course, have communed with nature. But in the religion, the exoteric religion itself, nature is that, it's one of those major dwelling places of the devil and of evil stuff that happens. So you've got this further layer of divorcing us from our natural partner in life, which is, nature around us. And it's not just a matter of agriculture. Agriculture is part of it, but there's way more, which the mystics, of course, felt and intuited and could more or less convey. But, when you're, that's the other thing that my mystic people in my esoteric grassroots people in Bengal, they were very clear that there are two principles that operate in humans, and both in terms of our incarnations and in terms of what we can explore from within these incarnations. And those two principles, which express as two human species, that's the way they put it, is male and female. That's all there is to it. And nature, which for them is prakriti. Prakriti is much more than what we call nature here. The whole of Earth is prakriti. It's a whole, the feminine principle, be it, out there in the beyond and here in incarnation. All of that is prakriti. It's the divinity that goes with purusha, which is human. And it's the interplay of these two. Purusha and Prakriti are versions of Shiva and Shakti. And it's the interplay of these two that makes creation, that makes stuff happen, both into incarnation and within this incarnation in the exploration of what it is to be human. So, once I had that, and I really explored that very, very deeply while I was, with those people out there. Then, the business of the estrangement, to put it mildly, of the feminine in the Christian religion, and, well, in all the monotheistic religions, it is just so much in your face, such that it's not a matter of, being a feminist trying to claim back an equal kind of role in life as men. But it's reclaiming the complementarity of the talents that men and women have differently and in different mixes, and that makes the whole juice of the game. But when that is taken away from women and from men, everybody loses, except that they can play their economic and power games with prostitution and with, the harems of the rich people and all the prohibitions on women, and the extra layer of guilt on women, which is actually amplified when they introduce the new role model. They've taken away the old mother goddesses, and they have to reintroduce the figure of Mary, because they realize, after 3-4 centuries, that if you don't have a feminine principle in there, the whole thing is going to fall apart. The people are simply not going to cooperate. So they reintroduce the feminine principle, but she's a virgin mother. And so you're going to have this role model for the women who are already guilty of being the purveyors of, sex and sin and temptation to males who are otherwise so pure. When you put together all the different elements of this sort of multifaceted, contradictory, nonsensical doctrine, and how it plays with the guilt instinct that is not actually an instinct. Out where I live here, there is, it's a difficult kind of game to instill a sense of guilt in Buddhists. Guilt is not, you've got karma, okay?
Yeah.
And you've got the simplified understanding of karma. But guilt is not intrinsically a part of karma. The point is, you make a mistake, you need to understand your mistake. Guilt does not need to be a part of the equation.
Exactly.
But the monotheistic things have laid on, very thick layers and multiple layers of the stuff of guilt. And all of this sits very deep in our unconscious, in our subconscious. So, you can't even blame the people who buy into religions. It takes something else. It takes exposure to something radically different for a person to start going to question that programming that is very, very deep, and it's intergenerational. We inherit it not only in the DNA or epigenetics of our parents and our lineages, but it's through the subconscious of the whole of humankind. So, they did a pretty fantastic job, those guys up there.
I just think that there's something to be separated here that we can kind of parse out, which is the edited version of the Bible that we are given, which was written $400 to $500 after 400 to 500 years after Jesus.
The money God, the money
Exactly.
God.
400 to 500 years after Jesus died, allegedly. So I think that that's something to really examine, is that we are not really reading the Word of God when we're reading the Bible. These are doctrines that have been passed on, that have been completely edited and maybe designed to control people. So
Of course.
I think that's the thing to really examine here, is that what has happened to people is that we understand our true nature. We understand our true connection to the earth and our true connection to humans, the male and female connection. But what has been removed from there or eroded from there is this idea of that kind of central symbiotic relationship that we have with God, the energy we call God, and it's been turned into this thing that calls us a sinner, or that we live in sin. So when you are examining Christianity, which version of the Bible are you examining?
I did not use the Bible. I used the work of people who have worked on the Bible, because I mean, if I were to be a specialist in all the topics that are included in this book, Krivda, well, I wouldn't have written it. I'd still be at it, 3 lifetimes from now. So, because I have academic training, I have a snout. And because I'm also contemplative, I have this other snout. I've got both the mystic and the intellectual snouts. So, and I'm relatively multilingual, so I can go and look for sources outside the English language. And there is this translator of Hebrew who's becoming quite famous also, in the English-speaking world, called Mauro Biglino.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, he's the guy who started off making available to modern people who don't know Hebrew his naked translation, word for word, literal translation of the Hebrew. And he shows that, Hunter, you're referring to the modifications of the text after the time of Jesus. Those modifications were happening in the centuries well before Jesus. Because, as Biglino shows, Yahweh was a pretty terrible guy who demanded, child sacrifice as other gods, colonizers, in that realm at the time. And my understanding is that they had to somehow change the story to make it not so terrible. because it is an essential foundational element of establishing the Jewish or Judaic religious ethnicity.
Mhm.
And that's the other problem, with religions that are associated with a particular ethnicity. Catholicism is Catholic, it's for everybody, thank you very much. And so they changed the story. And then after Jesus, well, the only credible thing to me is the things that the man Jesus said.
Mhm.
Okay. And some of those nuggets are present, like, the business of loving, the business of letting little children come to me. I mean,
Mhm.
little children come to me not for human sacrifice. I mean, there are, all these little nuggets of the man Jesus, and the big nugget when he goes into the temple, because he knows that the money god has been growing in the shade of the gods
Mhm.
for centuries, if not millennia. And so his big gesture is to go and denounce the fact that the religious, spiritual side of things in the priesthood is completely part and parcel of the banking system at a time when, the people, the Jewish people, I mean, different people in that area were being increasingly pauperized, as is happening now,
Mhm.
Mhm.
because, the money god and the spiritual god were completely in league. They're, part and parcel of the same thing. So, you know, after that, once they've, once they've plowed through the different versions of the word of Jesus
Mhm.
over the early centuries after the man Jesus is sacrificed, there are loads and loads and loads and loads of different stories, and I'm not aware of any of the Gnostic texts that actually claim to say this is what Jesus actually said.
Mhm.
And it's very obvious that the four evangelists, they were not contemporaries of Jesus, and they came up with very different stories too, albeit with commonalities, but all these different stories. So the word of God, it's not there, and that settles the problem. If it's particularly true in North America and in places like the Philippines. There is this blind faith in the text. People don't have an idea that texts can be rewritten and are
Exactly.
rewritten. They
Yeah.
have no idea of the whole history behind the rewriting of these texts and the people who died for it.
Yes.
Mhm.
And then, even the King James Bible, the thing that King James wrote before, having his Bible redone,
Mhm.
was a treatise on witches and demonology. I mean, he was terribly excited by all the witchcraft, all the witch trials that were beginning to explode around that time. So, he cut his teeth on the demons and the witches. And then he went on to King James Bible. Uh, um, to take any text, any book as being, the absolute is completely ridiculous. But
Yes.
Mhm.
since people are brainwashed and intergenerationally and for centuries and millennia, this programming is inside us. You can't blame them, especially if they don't know any other language, where they might be curious and they might go and see, oh, what they say in English here in my Bible is not the same thing in that Italian Bible. It's not the same thing.
Exactly.
Why don't they say the same thing? It's when you start getting out of a monolithic culture,
Mhm.
such as, in spite of all the melting pot that you have up in North America, it is such a monolithic culture for the Bible people.
Yep.
Even in spite of the variations with all the denominations that you have in America, there is
Mhm.
this insistence on, yes, this is the party line kind of thing. It's absolutely amazing. And, why do we have so many denominations in America? Why this diversity? Why? And then you have the Quakers,
Mm-hmm.
who are, a pretty pure version of the good part,
Mm-hmm.
in harmony with nature and none of this techno bullshit and all that. I mean, it's the diversity that you have in America is such that, I don't know. I mean, any American would normally look at, okay, why do the Quakers do their believing and life so differently from me? And and then why are their kids more healthy than mine? And etc., etc. But the other thing is, with the confusion and the multiple layers of guilt, you're not going to question anything. To be able to question anything, you need to have 1 inch of yourself that can sit next to the 1 cubic meter of yourself, to look at the cubic meter and it's kind of weird, and to start observing stuff. But when people don't have that distance, from themselves, the useful distance, and at the same time they're completely dissociated within themselves because of the
Mm-hmm.
guilt, because of all the falsities, all the contradictions that just simply don't make sense. They make life nonsensical. Well, then, yes, you're going to take refuge in whatever society gives you, and we're just coming out of an era where there has been convenience and consumption and all these things as drugs to make us addicted to not looking where we might be able to look.
Well, and especially when you consider the filter of the printing press. And prior to the printing press, you had to go to a priest or to the local vicar to hear the word of God. So that was being filtered from someone else. So you didn't actually have access to a Bible or any text to read and interpret yourself. It was really based on someone else telling you what the word of God was. So I think that
Yeah.
has had a massive shift too, in that you are getting all of these interpretations and you're also getting them from an individual.
Who himself, at village level, the local priests were not terribly highly educated. So, I mean, it was okay. I mean, whatever was transmitted or conveyed there was not, I mean, they learned certain psalms by heart and they, whatever. And people were deliberately kept illiterate. And people were not allowed, even if you did know how to read and write, you were not allowed to own a Bible. The Great Revolution with Gutenberg was, well, okay, that people could have access to the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and this played a major role in the Reformation. In the Reformation and in the Protestant Calvinist sort of movements.
Mm-hmm.
So, because then people started looking at the books, but I mean, we would have to be able to remote view ourselves back into the Renaissance to be able to feel how these people felt when they read these texts that until then had been given to them only in partial oral form. Yeah, I won't go there because I don't know. But at the same time, we do know historically that it's from the Renaissance that the curiosity of wanting to find things out emerged, because the printing press gave access to stuff that was not the Bible also,
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
and to lots of stuff that would then, of course, be burnt, by the Inquisition and was it the Office of Prohibited Books.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's when censorship would come out in the open. The censorship was embedded in the previous oral system. But the other thing is, during those centuries of the Middle Ages of the oral system,
Mm-hmm.
the pagan ways of people were still very much alive. By the
Mm-hmm.
year 1000, the bishops were ranting and railing about, the faithful, doing their dances, their heathen dances around the church, and all this kind of stuff. It continued through until the witch trials, which themselves continued in the Age of Enlightenment. The greatest number of witch trials and burnings happened during the Enlightenment. That's another thing that we are not sufficiently aware of. It was not in the Middle Ages. Inquisition was it was a very temporary thing that was suddenly would be decreed in this or that region. Okay, we need to do some purging in the southeast of France, for instance, obviously the southwest. And then, it was not an institution yet. It got institutionalized much later. With all the changes of the printing press, as you say, the Renaissance, the human curiosity. But that's the reassuring thing, is that in spite of all the bullshit and mind programming, human curiosity was, the minute they could start to have access to different sources of knowledge, they just went, they flocked to it. And that's when you have this sort of huge flourishing of all sorts of stuff in the Renaissance. But with that flourishing, we had also the seeds of what would become Cartesian rationalism, which would lead into science that would divorce us even further from nature and would specialize us in certain forms of knowing, which are absolutely anti-mystical, anti-natural esoteric. We would have this resurgence of interest that we have now in alchemy and spagyrics and all these things, which are very valid, but they're only partial. They cover certain topics and they give you certain recipes that you're supposed to follow. Whereas the recipe for something much larger is already embedded in us by nature. So, this whole evolution has also specialized us because we've been so dissociated. It's specialized into this mind, this intelligence, which makes it that much easier for what I call the techno mind, because it's not just the tech, it's a mind. And it's not just created by humans, it's something else. There's an egregore of something there. And it requires us to live up here with our heads cut off from the rest of who we are, be it the physicality, the emotionality, the different consciousnesses that dwell in, the level of cells, the level of tissues, the level of emotions, and how all these things fit together. So, we are still, and I think this is perhaps our major problem now, is that we are up here.
Yes.
We've become
definitely.
very skilled at analyzing things, pulling them apart. But how many people actually connect the dots of everything?
Right.
Well, I think it's kind of a symptom of hypermaterialism too, getting up here, because we get sort of addicted to what we like to perceive as objectivity, which is what scientism specializes in. Like, it's all about proving things, and if you can't prove it, then it might as well just be a flight of fancy. So it's obsessed with repetition. It's obsessed with a world that we can only engage with through our senses. It's obsessed with something that can be weighed or measured, something that you can point to and then ask the person next to you if they're seeing the same sort of thing. So, yeah, it's a strange. I mean, do you think that going back to what you said about the egregore, do you think the tech egregore is the mutation of a previous egregore that sort of was there ahead of time? Do you think this is a whole new beast?
This is where we go into territory that I've never been particularly interested in ufology, but when I got into Mauro Biglino and his reading of Yahweh with all his magic devices,
yes,
and the notion and then, you know, the notion that humans have been seeded a number of times on this planet via different ET races or what have you, all in conjunction with the fact of what people call multidimensionality or multi-density, spirits and all that kind of thing, which used to be real things for our ancestors. We've banished them. They no longer exist. There's only the Holy Ghost, who is, you know, unknowable. But spirits, the non-tangible reality of a far larger reality than our incarnate reality, is something that we have completely lost also by being up here. But by being up here, the mind, this mind, operates in a linear fashion, like our languages sort of, you know, unravel their discourse in a linear fashion. But illiterate people, and I lived with illiterate people for a long time, they still have the remnants. But I've also encountered illiterate people who were, I mean, you know, the amount of memory that they have, the amount of knowledge that they have, because they don't entrust stuff to books, they have to hold it all, and it's not in the brain, it's held in their field. It's not a thing. And so they have this multidimensional perception where logic is never just, you know, A goes to B goes to C. C is going to go to A, then to Z, and then come back to B, go via F, and it's going to reconstitute the web of life. So, you know, when we talk of materialism, that's another one of those buzzwords of the West that establishes ipso facto a dichotomy with spirituality. And it keeps matter divorced from spirit, whereas matter derives from spirit. Our incarnations come from who we are as soul beings, or whatever it is that we call our intangible selves that inhabit these bodies. So, you know, I mean, the whole business of what it is to be human and to be here on this earth has to do with the great mystery of incarnation, of the subtle and the material, the subtle and the gross in their interaction. And this is what, you know, true tantric practitioners are well aware of. True tantric practitioners, not the neo-tantrism that, you know, that you've got with the New Age. You know, when we talk, when we rant about materialism, we're actually accusing matter. When matter is a very big deal, because it takes a hell of a lot of transformations and energy for subtle realms to come into incarnation. And it's only through incarnation that change can meaningfully happen in a way that the universe can take hold of and try to, you know, replicate elsewhere. Perhaps. I mean, you know, I'm not the universe, so I don't, you know, I don't know, but it's
Sure you are.
in a different way, okay? In a different way.
Yeah. You're an expression of the universe.
You know, it's uncomfortable to sit at the edge between this mind and the larger mind, consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, all these words are mind, M-I-N-E-D, M-I-N-D fields. All of these words, because they've all been instrumentalized, in particular by, you know, New Age and by science and things like that, so that, you know, everything is consciousness. Okay, what the hell is consciousness? I mean, we know as humans that we've got a conscious, a subconscious, and potentially also an unconscious. Okay, the earth is conscious, we've discovered. Okay, what kind of consciousness does earth have? Consciousness creates everything. Oh, what kind of consciousness? I mean, does consciousness have agency? Is consciousness the same as knowledge? What is it in terms of the quality of knowing? All these questions are not being asked by the people who use these words, you know, without caution.
Mhm.
And so, materialism versus spirituality, it's an ism. Okay, perhaps we should call it. It's more dangerous actually in terms of the mechanistic functioning of it. It makes our minds function in a mechanistic way in interpreting processes and things around us that we study with science, and we have to make them operate mechanistically so that we get our answers. We take this tiny slice of reality. I'm going to examine, such a bug. But to examine the whole bug, I have to cut off one leg and examine that one leg first. So I'm going to go to the smallest thing. And once I've examined and analyzed all the different bits and pieces, then perhaps I can put them together and understand the mechanics of how the whole bug works. That's an incredibly linear process, but that is the process that is actually happening with us when we're talking about materialism. We are reducing the spiritual realm, the realm of the subtle, with its multi-dimensions, and there again, there's another word that's dangerous, its multiplicity. We're reducing it to something mechanistic. And, you've got people who do all sorts of meditation, things like that, and then they're going to bring it into their consciousness to interpret it. This happened to me while I was, having a walk out in nature. This means that.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to be conversant with the language of nature. It's this linear mechanistic thinking which is applied by postmodern science, especially because the early scientist was well aware of the multiplicity of everything. And they tried to convey it, they tried to write it, and it became increasingly sort of shrunken down into a funnel of linear stuff that the mind could sort of grab, comprehend, the little mind could grab, comprehend, and turn into, you do A, you're going to get B. This sort of simplistic sort of causality, simplistic explanation, simplistic everything, which then produces these buzzwords and these cliched concepts that people use without feeling the whole depth that came before in the genesis of these concepts. Like, there's this convention, as above, so below. Out in my esoteric grassroots India, what they say is everything that is in the universe is in the human body. Wow. It's kind of different. So,
Yes,
people say,
quite.
we're going to say as above, so below. Okay. Or we use these we use these buzzwords, which are abbreviations, which facilitate our communication as Westerners. And it does facilitate our communication, provided all parties in the conversation are agreed as to the whole complexity of the iceberg that sits underneath that one word or that one phrase. So I'm sorry, that was my big rant around
No, it's
materialism.
wonderful.
Yeah. Don't be sorry.
Yeah,
I'm in the academic world right now, and so I spend much of my time reading literature about neurobiology. I'm studying to be a psychologist, but I'm also interested in neuroscience and the pivot away from this very linear version of scientism is kind of exploding right now in research, where people are looking at other aspects of the mind and perhaps understanding that the frontal lobe is not really where our decision making happens, that a lot of this that you're talking about is happening in the subconscious, that the gut microbiome is very intrinsically related to decision making as well. So I think the upside of what I'm saying is that there's this old guard that exists, and now there are new energies coming into these realms that are saying, okay, maybe there's some other relationship that we need to examine. So that gives me hope that we aren't necessarily going down this path. It's a foregone conclusion.
Oh, I think, and it's not just in science, it's in everything that at least some people are questioning and are sort of, they're reopening what used to be sort of closed doors. So yeah, it's exciting that it's happening at last. And the more people will be, and it's not just in the neurosciences, it's in everything. And the more people will be on these tracks, there will be too many, to all be burnt at the stake. Mm-hmm. So we won't go back into that kind of inquisition, as long as the techno mind does not sort of come before and mess everything up with everything digital and turning our real reality into a new real reality, according to their doctrines. Yeah, the whole business of neurosciences, the sciences need to become mystical again. I mean, mm-hmm. The ancient seers of India, and I think all true insights that then give rise to a major discovery in science, they come from the field where these insights are held. And when a person is ready for it, this insight is going to come in. And because it is mysterious, while at the same time being absolutely obvious when it comes in from out there. But it's pre-verbal. In its pre-verbal status, it is crystal clear and completely opaque in terms of how it is going to be brought into this world, into this language that operates in this material world, incarnate world. Mm-hmm. But the ancient seers, they developed the mathematics of the zero from having an insight from the infinite. The different things, the Ayurvedic system, where you've got some of these pictures where you've got this sort of human shape with all sorts of little sort of threads, mm-hmm. Making a web in every direction. Not every seer is going to see the same web, mm-hmm. which is what science would like to be able to see.
Exactly.
But they saw the web. They all see a web. Consequently, the reality of the web is the core factor, which is not just one thing. It's a concept that it has all sorts of manifestations, all sorts of dimensions. You've got the cobweb, you've got the necklace of Indra, you've got mm-hmm. the web of the electric universe, you've got the web of, the nervous system, you've got the web of what is actually the thing we call DNA, mm-hmm. which is, I've disappeared. In my contemplative practice, it can't possibly be just an acid, as in deoxyribonucleic acid, mm-hmm. if that's the word. It's how can the translation of my soul being into an incarnational being be conveyed only through an acid, with all my subtle, spiritual, energetic, cognitional, all the different dimensions. How is it possible for that to be conveyed just through a thing that we call an acid? There's way more than that. And actually, there was a great scientist in Russia called Garyayev. You may have heard of him. And he was interested in the junk DNA, the largest part of the DNA. That, okay, they no longer officially call junk, but that sort of nickname has stuck. But the thing is, so much of it is in the immaterial. That's a web. So taking back, I'm going back to the web image, the web concept that can be so multivalent, multidimensional, multi-meaning. So what is this thing that we reductively called DNA? I can't say that I know, but I know for sure that it's much more than an acid. And it's, of course, much more than the 4% of our thing that they call DNA, which is actually the DNA that they can study and that they can model and that they can mess around with on their computers. There's all the rest of it. There's the fact that, matter is only 4 or 5% of the actual thing that we call matter, including ourselves. All the rest of it is whatever it is, etheric. We don't know the words for this, but if we have a sense like the ancient seers for the immaterial, if we have that kind of sensitivity, including within our 5 senses, our 5 senses have been blunted. But the 5 senses of the hunter-gatherer and of the mystic, they see, hear, smell stuff that is not there physically, to the person sitting next to them, but it's there. So, science needs to recover that, the curiosity of the mystic.
Exactly.
I mean, the mystic basically is a curious person, is a very curious person, is an explorer. It's not just that, God happened to me. No, the mystic is a traveler, a voyager, a journeyer, And so if science really needs to recover that dimension, because it is in the subtle realms that we can find the answers. And they're never direct answers. They're never linear answers. But snippets of insights come to us, and all of a sudden, there's something, I feel something big has happened to me, and I can't make sense of it with my present wherewithal, which means I'm going to have to chew on that thing that came to me from out there. I have to chew on it. But I can't chew on it only up here. There's the whole of the knowing me, which is also my physicality. It is my gut. It is my heart. And it is this field of me. All of that is going to have to chew on this thing. And then that's my hero's journey, since that's another one of the cliches we like to use, where I can bring back from that chewing and from the monsters I'm going to encounter in that chewing, that digestion of all sorts of stuff. I'm going to be able to produce, a distilled essential oil of knowing something, of information or whatever, that I can bring back to my peers. We're going. I'm sorry. I think I'm ranting.
Hello, my dear.
Hello.
What did you think of Enna?
I enjoyed her. I wish that we would have used Zoom so that we would have had a consistent conversation. It was very fascinating, and there were lots of different avenues that we could have traveled.
For sure. She did mention early in our correspondence that she usually uses Zoom without problem. Did you just yawn over there off the side of the mic?
Maybe.
And I should have taken heed. I didn't think that I mean, obviously we've never had this sort of a problem before, but it did sort of interrupt the flow of the conversation. But it was still a very incredible conversation, and barely got to any of my my list of questions. But it's one of those conversations where it's just meanders into alcoves that you could never predict anyway. I mean, that's kind of the way that the book is. The book is so thick and dense. I was kind of struggling in the first couple of chapters, going like, how are we going to even converse about this? Like, there's so much going on here. Like, how do you choose which direction to go? But I just picked a few questions and assumed that organically it would go in the direction that it was supposed to. And that's what happened, with tons of interruptions.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happened.
Okay.
She was great. I really enjoyed her and her environment. I really enjoyed the rooster and the chicken, hearing the chickens in the background and seeing her kitty cats, and sounded like someone was shuffling around the kitchen awake or waking, and I enjoyed that. The organic nature of her environment was nice.
Indeed.
I think what happens when we get into these dialogues is that I think, my gosh, I wish these were face-to-face conversations. And how I see the podcast developing is actually traveling to meet people and traveling to have conversations, because I think that will add a richness and a depth to what we're doing, because of the energy exchanges that happen when you're in the same room with someone. And I would love to go back to Thailand, and I would love to go to an area where we could speak without the use of this type of technology.
I agree. Eventually, perhaps we will get to that point. I've stated that I would like to make sort of more of a documentary format for these things, but I thought of those, when I was saying that, as separate entities, sort of about the subjects that we talk about. But it would be cool to sort of not only do that, but include the interviews with the people that we talk with in their context, in their environment,
Totally.
and all of the things surrounding that. Because as you get it now, they're sort of disembodied to a certain degree, not completely without a body or a context, but disembodied conversations that sort of come out of the ether and then go back. But to have it so that you could sort of lead up to it and then sort of walk away from it gracefully with a lot of other stuff sprinkled throughout, I think would be really delightful.
Well, I think the thing that I consider is that in these discussions, there's two different realities happening. There's the reality that we are in this room together, and then there's the reality that the guest is in the room that they are in. And what I would love is actually to merge these realities where we are inhabiting the same space, because I think there's a different level of energy that would happen, and a different type of a conversation that would happen, because we wouldn't have these technical issues, and we could really perceive that person's energy and they could perceive our energy. And I just think it would be a richer forum in order to have these types of dialogues. So that's an exciting thing to present and to think about in the future. Because I have been watching, I actually listen to podcasts from, different people, and they do these conversations in different ways. And one person in particular, he travels to different parts of the world and he interviews people. And most of the times they're in some form of a studio, but it is like a face-to-face conversation. And I think that there is definitely something to be said about doing that. And this is definitely the type of person that I would feel like we would have a deeper conversation if she was in the room with us.
I see it more like being field recordings. Like, I can't imagine taking Enna into a sterile, overly quiet studio and having a conversation with her. Technically, it might sound fantastic, but to get the background noises of her reality and what's going on, I think that's half of it right there.
Yeah. Well, some of these studios, one of the people that I'm thinking of in particular, the studio setup, they basically set up in different environments. So he has his own equipment and then he brings it into a environment, and the environment was a wood shop. Cool. So in the background there were saws going and chainsaws, and so it brought a different level or layer into the conversation because you had these ambient noises happening in the background. But absolutely, if in her environment, it would be fantastic to have cats jumping on us and
sharing
purring,
a pot of tea
and sharing a pot of tea and hearing the rooster. And
I heard more than one rooster myself.
It sounded like a very vocal rooster.
Yeah, well, that's what roosters are, pretty much vocal, which is why they're not
kittens
welcome at in highly densely populated areas like we are living in, or a neighborhood for that matter. It doesn't have to be highly populated or densely populated. Yeah, I kept thinking of Joseph Campbell, like the way, especially reading her book, probably through the first third of it, the way that she draws from such a wide breadth of subject matter, but at the same time, it's nowhere near, it's not dry at all. It's very moist and dense. Like, I just think of like a handful of wet earth and moss, and there's so much going on. There's like an ecosystem in every handful. There's so much going on there that it kind of, like Joseph Campbell, in a way, he can sort of set your mind reeling into a place maybe that you were nowhere near when you first started watching this talk, say with Bill Moyer, and then you're all of a sudden you're taken into this world where you're just thinking about these pictures that he's planting in your mind with all of these things that he's telling you about myths and legends. And her writing has the same effect. And the way, I mean, I've done a lot of listening to conversations with her throughout the last week or two, and she wields language in the here and now like she does on pen and paper. It's not like something that she premeditates and doesn't speak like that, but she delivers her words in the here and now exactly like that too. Very dense, very powerful, and carrying a whole lot of weight to them. To great effect, I think.
I like it. I had lots of questions that I wanted to ask her about, the history of women. And I think part of it is because of the class that I'm taking right now that really has influenced my perspectives on women in pre-modern Europe, and how education was handled for women and the role that women had in the home, and kind of the foundation that women were afforded of kind of running a house, and how there is now this shift and this pivot for women to really, and a discouragement of women being in the home and running the home, and kind of forcing women into the workforce, and what the rationale behind that is from a esoteric standpoint. And I do think that all of that has been by design. Um, Not to say that I don't think women should be educated, or that women should have sovereignty over their lives and how they live their lives, but I think that there is a definite shift and a move to kind of force women outside of this natural relationship that they have with the home and the land, and kind of a disconnection from that. And it's interesting to be reading about when these periods happened and how women responded to them, and the role of religion and all of that. And so I would have loved to drill into that with her, because I'm sure she has some interesting perspectives.
Indeed. Well, next time we'll do it again.
Yes, we absolutely need to have Enna back on, and I really enjoyed her thoughts and her perspectives, and I find her a fascinating character.
That being said, I don't know why I said that being said, because what I'm going to say now doesn't really have anything to do with what was being said. But thank you all so very, very much. I mean, did you express what you needed to express? Okay. Thank you all so very
Yes.
much for listening. And hopefully you were able to glean something positive or new, or a different slant on things maybe that you hadn't considered before, or had, but not in the context that Enna brought it forth. If you have any suggestions for guests, or praise or blame, or casserole recipes, nobody ever sends casserole recipes. You can send them to the melt podcast at protonmail.com, or
you can reach out to me at hunter-muse at protonmail.com.
Again, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you all on Locals and Patreon for supporting us. Helps to keep these things going, helps to make a little bit more room so I can spend the time that I would love to spend putting energy and love into this labor of love. So thank you. You help afford me a little freedom to do that. Until next time, we love you. Ta-ta.